First of all, can you explain the concept of no-fault divorce to our viewers?
Sure. No-fault divorce, basically, prior to 2010, New York was actually one of the last states that held on to there having to be fault for divorce. So you had to prove grounds in order to get divorced. Typically, there was adultery, which was actually not used very often. There was constructive abandonment, which means you didn't have sex for the last year, despite the fact that one party asked the other one. There was cruelty. And then there were some other various ones, but those were the ones that basically people usually use for divorce. And in New York, before 2010, you had to allege all of these things in order for a judge to grant divorce. And now in 2010, they said, okay, now you can have irretrievable breakdown of the marriage, and therefore people can just get divorced without proving grounds.
So what's your take on it? Do you think that folks should have to give a reason for a divorce?
I absolutely don't. I've been practicing law for a long time, and I can say that when we had to actually prove grounds, it was awful. It was a terrible, terrible thing for these people to do. I mean, especially now in the day where people are tweeting, where you're able to access so much on the internet. You had to do drafts of like a constructive abandonment, you had to make sexual claims. People don't want to be doing that. And then for cruelty, you had to really state out all sorts of things. You had to badmouth your spouse when you actually might have been getting an amicable divorce. Now instead, you had to sit and you had to say terrible things about it. And a judge can actually say, you know what, that's not terrible enough. We're going to keep you two married. And I've seen that happen, and it's an awful thing to do. And so now, again, with writing things down and putting things on the internet, you don't want your children being able to get access to this when you're in a situation where people actually just want to get divorced. They realize they don't want to be together and they want to move on with their lives. So I supported it.
Yeah, I would support it as well. How about I don't like him anymore? That seems like good a reason as any. Most people just grow apart. To give a reason, it's like you get a woman started on the reason she wants to give a divorce, you might have a talk show at the end of the day. But moving on to the article about conservatives and the rise of no-fault divorce. Now, when I read this article, it was really interesting to me because it was almost shaping it like the rise of no-fault divorce was a bad thing, that conservatives are encouraging no-fault divorces and that somehow this is problematic or it's harmful. Can you kind of shed some light on this?
You know, I don't completely understand it myself, I will say. I think that a lot of people still hold on to family values as they define it, and therefore they think that divorce is going to, rock that world, when in fact, that's actually not what's going on. And as you were saying initially with the red states, people that are holding on to these family values, what's going on is the divorce rates are actually higher. And part of the reason they were saying on that is that they're forcing people to get married. People are getting married much younger. They're not allowing, they don't want people living together first. So they're not testing the waters, with no abortion and things like that. There's a lot of people that are having children very, very young when they might not be wanting to. And it really puts them in a position where divorce rates are actually higher in situations where people are claiming family values.
I know that the family values argument is pretty big for the conservative base. Now, I've said on my show time and time again, I'm a social moderate. Honestly, I could care less what people do in their own time as long as I don't have to pay for it. I know that the American family is important, though, and I think preserving it is important, but I don't think that policies that keep families together or parents together that shouldn't be together, I don't think that's helpful for anyone. To force people to be together, that's not helpful for children. Part of the article that I read is that this rise of no-fault divorce is problematic because it leads to poverty. It leads to lost custody. It leads to childhood depression. Now, that seems like an awful lot to put on the shoulders of having to explain a reason why you want to get divorced. It doesn't seem very common sense to me.
I would absolutely agree with you. It's not common sense in any way. And when you talk about childhood depression and things like that, what kind of child is going to be how is a child going to be when you have two people that are fighting and that should not be together, that are staying together just because? These are role models that these children are going to be looking at. You think they're going to be happy kids in that situation? I don't think so.
I think the concept of marriage is changing a lot in this country as well, and I think that both parties are starting to reflect that. Either you have one that's going very conservative, very ultra-conservative, and saying the family must stay together. A lot of it's religious implications that go along with it. That's okay if folks want to have those deeply held convictions. And then I think the left is moving more so to the left, saying marriage isn't as important anymore. But it's very interesting we start throwing in talks of same-sex marriage into the two, because we've got both sides, one that's very pro-marriage but anti-same-sex marriage, and then the left is saying we're not really for the constraints of marriage, or we're more liberal in that aspect, but we want same-sex marriage. So it's very interesting how partisanship is shaping up in the concept of marriage. What's your take on the whole deal?
It's a really good point, and I think that is exactly what is going on. I think what's happening is that people are constructing marriage and families differently. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people that aren't getting married, doing a lot of the Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell kind of relationships, and they're just raising their children together. So I do think that that's going on. It is an interesting point that the fact that it is that group that is also pushing so much for same-sex marriage, and then you are on the other end about they don't want to define family as two people of the same sex getting married, but yet they want to promote marriage. So I absolutely agree with you. It's an interesting, ironic situation.